This is why you don't trust every savior who comes bearing gifts. He came with smiles, promised scholarships, carried rice, and spoken sweet proverbs. But behind his white agbada was blood. That's what happened to these two poor children who were chosen by a generous visitor, only to uncover a horror too dark for words. Hey family, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another chilling tale. And before we dive in, drop your country in the comments. I love knowing where my amazing viewers are tuning in from. Now let me tell you the terrifying truth about Baba Siyi and the drum that fed on silence. They say the drum in Oyo only beats when it's hungry, and that year the hunger came early. The sun had barely risen when Baba Siyi arrived in Umuas. His frame was tall, his agbada pure white, untouched by dust or sweat. A rust-colored amulet hung from his neck, and his walking stick clicked like a metronome with every step. He wasn't a stranger to Umuez. People knew him as the city man who never forgot his roots. He brought rice at Christmas, spoke in slow Yoruba proverbs, and always left with the gratitude of a family behind him. On this particular visit, his feet took him beyond the town square, beyond the tired cries of traders and the sizzling of akara in roadside pans. Under the old mango tree, where the goats rested in the afternoon, sat a boy, thin, tall, and almost invisible. His name was Ikenna. His shirt had once been blue, but now looked like water had washed the color away. His sandals were barely holding on by threads, and his face carried the weight of hunger and silence. Baba Say walked up to him and sat down slowly, the ground crackling beneath him. The boy didn't flinch, just kept staring at the dust like it held answers. Baba Say's voice broke the quiet, deep and smooth like melted charcoal. "Boy, do you want to change your life?" Ikenna looked up. His eyes were dull, but there was a flicker, small but present. His lips parted. His voice didn't come, but his head nodded slowly. Baba Say smiled faintly. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "I will take care of you. You will eat well, dress well, and become a man of knowledge." That night, Baba Say visited Ikenna's mother. She was a widow, known for roasting yam by the roadside. Her fingers were burnt from charcoal, her wrapper always smelling of smoke and oil. When Baba Say entered her small room, she stood and adjusted her scarf, unsure whether to smile or cry. He told her about Ikenna, how he wanted to train the boy, send him to school, and make him great. The woman's eyes watered. "Please, make sure he becomes somebody," she whispered. By dawn, Ikenna was packed. There wasn't much to take, just a faded shirt, a wrapper from his mother, and a small tin cup. The village watched him go with mixed feelings. Some whispered blessings. Others wondered if the boy would ever return. Baba Say walked beside him, smiling wide. To the villagers, it looked like a new beginning. When they reached Ibadan, Ikenna's eyes stretched. There was light that didn't blink, streets that never slept, and buildings that kissed the sky. Baba Say bought him new clothes. A neat white shirt, 2 pairs of socks, and a school uniform with a badge stitched on the pocket. He gave him a small torchlight and a plastic watch that glowed in the dark. Ikenna stared at the items like they were magic. He was enrolled in JSS 2. At first, he was quiet in class, always sitting at the back, watching others. But slowly, his confidence grew. He answered questions. He helped clean the blackboard. He made one friend named Sunday who loved math but couldn't spell. Every Sunday evening, Ikenna wrote letters to his mother. "Dear Mama," one of them read, "I touched a computer today." But everything changed when second term came. One evening, Baba C returned from the shrine behind the compound. His face looked tired, darker somehow. As they sat to eat, he looked at Ikenna and said, "Books are sweet, but they don't plant yams." The boy blinked. He didn't understand. "You must help around here," Baba Say said louder this time. "You're not a visitor." From that night, Ikenna's schedule changed. School stopped. The uniform was folded and placed inside a plastic bag. The plastic watch was taken away. "No distractions," Baba Say said. Ikenna began waking up before the cock crowed. He fetched water from the well, chopped firewood, washed heavy mortar bowls, and pounded yam till his wrists ached. The shrine drums needed cleaning. The festival soup needed stirring. The talking drum, large and oddly shaped, had to be wiped carefully but never touched barehanded. His hands developed blisters. His eyes lost their spark. His voice, once curious, turned quiet. And no more letters reached his mother. But that was only the beginning. That year, the Oyo New Yam festival came early. People said the gods had blessed the harvest. They didn't know what was feeding the blessings. Babase returned to Umuez for the festival, bringing stories of Ikenna. "He is now in Lagos," he said proudly, "studying to become an engineer." He passed around a photograph, printed freshly. Ikenna stood in a sharp suit in front of a tall building. It looked real. The villagers clapped. His mother cried. They called Baba Say a man of honor. The next day, another family gave him their child. When Baba Say returned to Umuez after the New Yam festival, his hands weren't empty, and neither was his heart. The villagers had crowned him a savior, and this time, they welcomed him like a returning king. Women brought gifts: coconuts, dry fish, roasted plantain. Men offered their respect and admiration. But Baba Say had come for something more precious than all their praise: another child. That child was Oledo. She lived in a crumbling hut on the edge of the village, where the grass grew wild and the air smelled of herbs. Oledo was only 12, but she was wise beyond her years. Her grandfather, blind from a disease that had stolen his sight long ago, called her his angel. She guided him to his stool every morning and folded his clothes every night. Her mother sold bitter leaf in woven bowls, barely making enough to buy salt. Still, Oledo smiled. She sang when she walked. Her voice was sweet and soft, like breeze on dry leaves. Baba Say came just as the sun bowed to the evening. His agbada shimmered with golden embroidery, and his smile lit up the doorway. He listened to Oledo sing to her grandfather, and then sat beside her mother with his familiar velvet words. "She's special," he said. "Let her shine like the moon. I'll train her. I'll send her to school. She'll sit in offices with fans that never go off." Her mother hesitated. She looked at Oledo, who stood behind her, eyes wide, hopeful, frightened. Then she nodded. "Take her," she whispered. "Give her a better life." The next day, Oledo left with a small plastic bag, holding her only clothes and a skipping rope her grandfather had made from leftover thread. She didn't look back. Ibadan smelled different from Umuez. There were more colors, more cars, more voices. Baba Say's compound was wide and walled. Inside was a garden with hibiscus flowers and an old shrine covered in dark cloth. Oledo was shown her new room, small but clean. A red backpack lay on the bed. Beside it, polished shoes and a toothbrush with blue bristles. Her heart leapt. That week, she was enrolled in school. She joined the choir and sang so beautifully that even the music teacher cried once. "She's a gift," he said, "a voice from the ancestors." Oledo won a science competition for building a solar oven out of foil and cardboard. She called home and told her grandfather, who smiled and blessed her through the phone. Her mother cried from joy. For the first time in her life, Oledo felt seen. But joy has its enemies. 3 months later, just like it had happened with Ikenna, Baba Say changed. He stopped smiling so much. His tone grew shorter, his eyes colder. One evening after a long day of errands, he looked at her while chewing on roasted ground nuts. "Even goats help around the house," he said, spitting a shell into the dust. "What about you?" Oledo blinked. "But I have school," she said quietly. He chuckled. "Books don't sweep floors." That night, her backpack disappeared. The skipping rope was taken. Her shoes were kept in a locked drawer. The next morning, instead of wearing a uniform, she was handed a rag. "Start with the corridor," Baba Say said. "The shrine must be clean." She cleaned, cooked, fetched water, and pounded yam until her hands blistered. She washed the compounds, blackened pots, and served guests during weekend meetings. Her voice, once full of music, became hoarse. Her schoolmates forgot her name. Her dreams folded themselves into the corners of her mind like the uniforms hidden under Baba Say's bed. But Oledo noticed things others didn't. At night, when the air grew cold and the wind whispered strange songs, she heard something from the shrine. A hum. Deep, low, rhythmic. A drum beat, but not played by human hands. A drum that breathed. There was a talking drum in the shrine, covered with red cloth and seated like a king on a wooden stand. No one touched it. But sometimes, when the moon was high, Oledo swore it moved, just slightly, like it was stretching. One night she tiptoed to the corner where she kept her mop and broom. The shrine's doors were open. From behind the curtain, she saw Baba Say kneel in front of the drum. He whispered in Yoruba, his voice trembling, "We have waited. The blood is clean. The time has come." Oledo froze. She backed away, heart slamming against her ribs. That night she didn't sleep. The humming of the drum echoed in her ears. The next morning she was told to go fetch herbs from the small room behind the shrine. "Alone?" she asked. "Yes," Baba Say said flatly. "It won't bite you?" She walked slowly, each step heavier than the last. The air was colder than usual. The floor creaked like it didn't want her there. When she opened the door, the smell hit her. Something sharp, like blood in old clay. And there it stood. The drum, uncovered. It was cracked and dark. Around it were feathers, bones, melted candles, and something wrapped in white cloth, stained red. Before she could move, she heard the door shut behind her. Click, click. She turned. Baba Say stood there. "You've seen too much." He reached behind a calabash. She didn't wait. She turned to run, only for the door to burst open. Bang! Dust filled the room. A tall figure stood in the doorway. Ikenna. Ikenna stood in the doorway like a spirit returned from exile. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his chest rising and falling in panicked rhythm, his feet bruised from days of walking. Behind him, the morning sun fought its way through dust and shadows, casting a ghostly halo around his shoulders. For a moment, neither Oledo nor Baba Say moved. Then Ikenna reached out. "Oledo, run!" The girl didn't hesitate. She bolted past the drum, past Baba Say's shocked face, and into the arms of the boy she had once heard about in whispers. The one who'd supposedly gone to Lagos. The one who wore suits in photographs. Ikenna grabbed her hand and pulled her outside, their feet slamming against the stone steps of the compound. Behind them, Baba Say roared. But the two children were already leaping over the low fence behind the shrine, into the narrow alley that led to the old cassava fields. Ikenna seemed to know every corner, every turn. He led them through dense bushes, rusting zinc fences, and broken footpaths until the walls of the city began to fade, and the scent of palm oil and smoke gave way to the green silence of the forest. They didn't stop running until their legs gave out. The sun was high, burning the tops of trees in their bare arms. Oledo collapsed against a fallen log, panting. Her throat was dry, her eyes burning with tears, not from sadness, but confusion. How did you know? She asked between breaths. Ikenna looked at her, his face older than his years. I never went to Lagos, he said. I was here, just like you, scrubbing floors, pounding yam, carrying basins on my head. But one night I saw him, Baba Seyi, feeding something into that drum. Something that moved, something that cried. Oledo shuddered. I escaped that night, hid in a refuse dump until morning. I tried to go back to Umuez, but I had no money, no shoes, nothing. I survived on scraps. Then I heard he'd gone back to the village. I knew he'd return with someone new. I waited until he brought you. I followed from afar. He looked down at his blistered feet. You were going to be the next offering. They spent the day in the forest, moving carefully, drinking from a stream that tasted like old iron. Birds called above them, and monkeys chattered in the distance. Ikenna had stolen some dry gari and groundnuts from a farm along the way, and they ate in silence. But as the sun dipped, they knew they couldn't stay. They had to return, not to Baba Seyi's house, but to Umuez. We have to tell them, Oledo said. Our parents, the police, everyone. What if they don't believe us? Ikenna asked. They will, she said, though her voice trembled. They have to. They began the journey through the night. The road back was long and full of ghosts, figurative and real. They crossed paths with nocturnal animals, trucks that roared too close, and towns that looked like dreams warped by fog. But with each step, their resolve deepened. By dawn, they reached the borders of Umuez. The town was just waking up. Roosters crowed. Firewood crackled under iron pots. Women swept their compounds with short brooms. And from a distance, Ikenna saw her, his mother, placing yams on a tray. Mama! He shouted. She turned, dropped the tray, and ran. My son! Jesus, my son! The reunion was thunderous. Neighbors rushed out. Oledo's mother came running too, barefoot, wrapper barely tied. The children were wrapped in embraces, the air filled with weeping and questions. And then the truth spilled out. Ikenna told them everything. The lies, the work, the shrine, the drum. Oledo added the rest, the whispers, the rituals, the near sacrifice. The town square filled quickly as a word spread. Elders came, the bell came, and soon someone called the police. The officers arrived just before noon in a van, with a dented bumper and cracked windshield. Two of them wore faded uniforms, their eyes tired, skeptical. But as they listened to the children and the crying mothers, who confirmed they had not heard from their children for months, their doubt turned to concern. We will investigate, one of them said. Show us where. And so with heavy hearts, Ikenna and Oledo led them back to Ibadan. When they arrived at the compound, it was quiet. Too quiet. The gates creaked open. The compound was empty. The shrine was locked. The kitchen cold. But the drum was still there, covered in red cloth, humming like it knew they had returned. The officers forced the door open. They uncovered the drum, and what they found made even the bravest of them step back. Inside the drum's hollow were tiny bones, teeth, small beads, wrappers of children long forgotten, names only known by grieving parents. It was no ordinary drum. It was a vessel. They arrested Baba Seyi that evening. He did not run. He did not resist. He looked at the officers as if they were children interrupting a sacred ritual. You do not understand, he whispered. The ancestors must eat. They cuffed him and put him in the back of the van. The villagers of Umuez gathered around as the news spread like dry season fire. Baba Seyi had not saved their children. He had taken them, trained them not for school, but for the pot, and the pot had always been hungry. The police van left Ibadan that evening with Baba Say inside, handcuffed, silent, unmoved. Behind him, his once glorious compound now lay still. The children's belongings, books, uniforms, skipping ropes, were collected as evidence. The talking drum, heavy with secrets, was carefully sealed and transported in a separate vehicle. No one dared to touch it with bare hands. In Umuwez, a storm of sorrow had gathered. Parents who had offered their children wept openly in the village square. They tore wrappers, slapped red earth on their foreheads, and wailed the names of sons and daughters who never returned. The Bali called an emergency gathering in the town hall, where Ikenna and Oledo stood quietly, their young faces marked with exhaustion and pain. "I gave him my child," one mother sobbed, holding a photograph of a smiling girl in a uniform. "He showed me this picture. He said she was in school, but she's gone." The truth was unbearable. The elders who had once praised Baba Si now sat with heads bowed. They had accepted his food, celebrated his wealth, and believed his lies, because it was easier than asking questions. His donations had built part of the new town hall. His stories had filled newspapers. His image had hung in classrooms as a son of the soil. Now all of that felt like salt in a wound. The police set up a small investigation unit in the nearby town. Baba Si was kept in custody, but he refused to speak. For 2 days, he sat in a wooden chair, staring at the wall, his lips sealed tighter than a sealed pot. Finally, a senior officer leaned in, frustrated. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "What did the children ever do to you?" Baba Si turned slowly, his eyes hollow like dry wells. "I wasn't always like this," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "There was a time when I sold jollof rice by the roadside. It was good rice. My wife said it was sweet, but people didn't come. They walked past. They mocked me." He paused. "Then one day a man approached me, a native doctor. He said my food lacked sacrifice. Real taste comes from the ancestors. He offered me power, a drum that would call customers, wealth, favor, if only I fed it." "Fed it what?" the officer asked. Baba Si blinked slowly. "The purest flesh." The town square was flooded with grief, but among the people, questions began to rise like smoke. What kind of man kills children to sell food? Why didn't we notice? Why did no one ask why these children never returned? Oledo sat quietly beside her mother, wrapped in a wrapper too large for her tiny frame. Her grandfather held her hand with the firmness of a blind man who had nothing but touch to give. But even he could feel that something had changed in her. She no longer sang. Her eyes, once full of joy and mischief, stared into the distance like they were trapped in another world. Ikenna too was different. He walked slower now. He didn't laugh with the village boys the way he used to. Even the smell of roasted yam made him flinch. Something had been taken from them, something no one could return, but their truth had saved others. One evening, the officer who led the case came to the village square with a list. "These are the names of 10 other children Baba Si admitted to taking," he announced, "all from surrounding villages. If you know any families missing a child, please come forward." A woman from Ajasi stepped forward, clutching a wrapper. "My son left with him last year," she whispered. "He said the boy went to Calabar for school. He never called. I thought maybe the boy just forgot." She broke down. The talking drum was moved to a secret location, sealed in a glass box covered in cloth and charms. The local priest refused to bury it. "This is not a drum," one of them said. "It's a mouth, a hungry mouth that must never be fed again." A new ritual was performed, the ritual of silence. The Baal called all the elders. They gathered in the town square at night around a sacred fire where the names of the lost were read aloud. For every name, a calabash of water was poured into the earth, symbolizing a life returned to the ancestors. Ikenna and Oledo were made to pour the last bowl together, their hands trembling. "We honor the truth you spoke," the Baal said. "We failed you. We failed all of them. But your voices, they have broken the silence." And the whole village repeated, "Never again." But silence has long roots. That same night, as the wind howled over the roofs of Umuez, Oledo awoke in her grandmother's hut. The moonlight spilled through the cracks in the bamboo wall. Something stirred in the corner of the room. At first, she thought it was her shadow, but then it moved. A figure stepped forward, a boy with hollow eyes and no mouth. He reached toward her. Oledo gasped and clutched her mat. The figure disappeared. She ran outside and screamed into the night, waking neighbors, calling her mother, trembling as if frost had touched her bones. "The drum is not done," she whispered. "The drum is still hungry." Morning came slow and quiet in Umuez, like the land itself was holding its breath. The dew refused to melt. The wind tiptoed through the trees, and not a single bird dared to sing. Word had already spread of what Oledo saw the night before. A boy with hollow eyes and no mouth. A child but not alive. A memory, a spirit, a warning. The villagers gathered again in the square. They had cried. They had cursed. They had performed the ritual of silence. But silence wasn't enough. Not anymore. The Baal stood in the center, his staff planted deep in the ground. "The girl saw something," he said gravely. "A child without a voice. The drum still speaks." Behind him, Ikenna and Oledo stood side by side. They were no longer just children. They had become messengers of truth. Truth soaked in blood, sweat, and the ashes of the forgotten. "We sealed the drum," said the police officer who led the investigation. "We locked it away." "But we didn't bury it," whispered an elder. "And until it is buried, it will dream." Across town in a dusty storage room guarded by 2 policemen, the drum sat in silence, sealed in glass, wrapped in red cloth, surrounded by charms. But even the guards said strange things happened at night. One claimed the cloth shifted on its own. Another swore he heard children humming a sad tune just before dawn. "It's cursed," one muttered. "No," said the other. "It's starving." By afternoon, the Baal called for the priests and the hunters. A final ritual was planned. Not just silence, but closure. The drum would be burned in the sacred grove, never to speak again. A hole was dug by the mouth of the old forest, where the air was thick with spirits and secrets. But when they arrived with the sealed box, something had changed. The cloth was gone, the glass was cracked, and the drum was no longer humming, it was beating. Boom, 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 slow, heavy, hungry. "No one must touch it," said the chief priest, backing away. The Baal nodded to the hunters. 4 strong men stepped forward, their hands shaking despite their guns and charms. They tied the drum with iron chains, lifted it into a wheelbarrow, and carried it into the grove, where the firewood had been laid. The fire was already crackling. Oledo and Ikenna watched from a distance, holding hands. One of the hunters poured palm oil on the wood. Another lit the edge. The flames climbed like wild tongues, orange and vicious. But just as they were about to place the drum in the fire, the sky changed. The sun dimmed, the wind stopped, and the forest whispered. The trees shook without breeze. The birds fled without sound. And from within the drum came a low growl, not of an animal, not of man, but something ancient. The hunters hesitated. "Do it!" shouted the priest. They hurled the drum into the flames. The fire screamed. It was not a normal burning. The air rippled. The ground trembled. The scent of charred bone filled the grove. And then, like lightning tearing the sky, a loud crack rang out, and the drum exploded in flames. Children's voices filled the grove, not wails but whispers, names, prayers, dreams never fulfilled, a final goodbye from souls trapped in wood and blood. The Baal dropped to his knees. So did the priest. So did everyone. Oledo covered her ears. Ikenna closed his eyes. The sound pierced their bones. Then, silence. True silence. The kind that only comes after something evil dies. When the fire cooled, nothing remained but ashes and broken chain links. The priest gathered the ashes in a calabash and buried it under the roots of the oldest tree in the grove. The spot was marked with 3 white stones and a carved message. "Here lies the hunger that must never return." From that day, the grove was closed. No one entered. No one spoke of it. The villagers returned to their homes, unsure whether to celebrate or mourn. But one thing was certain: the drum would never beat again. Back in Umuez, life slowly began to heal. The parents of the missing children held memorials. Photographs were placed on altars, and songs were sung in soft, broken voices. Oledo returned to her grandfather. Ikenna stayed with his mother. They went back to school, but the scars never faded. They didn't forget. They couldn't. But they walked with strength, because they knew they had ended something far older than them, far darker than any night. Years later, Oledo would become a teacher. Ikenna would become a journalist. Together, they would write a book titled The Drum That Fed on Silence. And in every village they visited, they told the story, not to scare, but to warn. Because even in peace, there is danger. Even in kindness, there are wolves. And some drums should never be played.